Good late afternoon and welcome to our first council meeting of the year, January 11th, 2022. This is also our first meeting where we will be beginning at 5 p.m. We continue to be under guidelines for anyone in attendance in this room to properly wear a face mask, whether they've received a vaccine or not. Items listed on the agenda may be taken out of order. 2 or more agenda items for consideration may be combined, and any item on the agenda may be removed or related discussion may be delayed at any time. I'll call the meeting to order. The agenda has been properly posted. All members of council are present in the chambers. And we will begin with the invocation. Pastor Kurt Hedlund. Please rise.
Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessings that we enjoy as residents of this community, as people who live in this time and place in history. We recognize that for most of us, food, shelter, education, good health care are givens, and many of our ancestors couldn't imagine some of these blessings that we have. At the same time, we recognize that because of the human condition, we always have challenges. And one of the challenges that we're dealing with today is the coronavirus pandemic. And so we need wisdom as individuals. We need wisdom in terms of our local government and how to deal with this. These people here connected with civil government have to deal with regular interactions with the public, and they need to balance that with their own safety. So give them wisdom. And our school leaders need that too. We recognize from what we've read and what we learn about that the academic advance of so many kids has been stymied as a result of having to go to virtual learning, and the mental health of our young people has been adversely affected. So we pray that our local schools would be able to stay open, that you would graciously keep us from having a major outbreak in our local schools. There are challenges that this body always has in dealing with the budget, and so we pray that you would give them wisdom. They have challenges in balancing the need to be generous to city employees with the need to be protective of the taxpayers of this community. Again, wisdom is needed. There are always challenges that come from dealing with people, and certainly I'm sure that's true in city government. So we pray that supervisors would know how to maintain the morale of employees, that there would be encouragement there. We pray that the consciences of individual employees would be strong and people would be motivated to do the right thing. We pray for the meeting tonight, asking that a spirit of civility would prevail, and give our leaders wisdom and insight in the issues that are before this body, and give them opportunities to work toward consensus. I pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor. We'll have the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And as Pastor Hedlund pointed out, children are, again, I just heard that the school district is going to add a couple of days to the holidays so that they can try and get some people well again. So we hope that works out well. Madam City Clerk, are there any public announcements?
No announcements that I'm aware of.
Thank you. We'll move to the first public comment period then. As stated in the posted agenda for this meeting, public comment may have been submitted prior to the meeting via email. We will also have an opportunity for the public to call in. Public comment during this initial period is limited to matters for action on the agenda. Each person wishing to speak during the public comment periods will have up to 5 minutes. As always, we ask people to be civil and concise. Is there anyone here in chambers who would like to speak in public comment? Please come forward. Ms. Finnegan, your hand went up first. Please state your name.
Deborah Finnegan.
Kathy Morris.
Hi, we're from Emergency Aid. How is everyone tonight? We want to talk about item 13. We wanted to kind of tell you what was going on. I know it's in for consideration for the rescue money. Quick recap. 2019, our average budget was $162,000. 2020, little snafu, $421,000, actually $422,000. In 2021, we have spent $274,000. We've had, October was a great month. We only had 2 mortgages or rents that were COVID related. We have seen an uptick, unfortunately. November and December, we've had 12 rents and mortgages that were definitely COVID related. As of today, our cash position is steady. We don't have a crystal ball. So if, you know, our pantry's full right now, we're doing really well, but we could certainly use any extra money. I did transfer $45,000 in November from our operating revenue account. Haven't put it back yet. And Kathy?
So I work in the intake office, and in the last December and January, 14 of the 17 people that I've helped with rent were COVID related. And so we see a group of people that are maybe, I don't know, 58 to 62 that maybe got sick and they're never going to be able to go back to work. And some of these people work side jobs, and because of COVID, they're not able to do that either. And this program has just been a life-saving for these people that would be kicked out of their houses and then also lately we've seen the younger families coming in with kids that have COVID, and so then they can't work because they have to stay home and take care of their kids. And so I think we're going to see more of that. We've been really busy the last 2 months, and we're only open 3 days in the intake office, and we have to turn people away some days, have them come back because we're just so busy in the pantry. And anyway, I appreciate everything Boulder City does for emergency aid. It's been a real eye-opener for me to work there, to volunteer, and I appreciate all the work that you guys do for us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to the basketball game.
Anyone else in chambers who would like to speak during public comment? All right, anyone wishing to call in? The number to call is 702-589-9629. This is our initial public comment period.
Public comment, please.
Go ahead.
Yes, good evening, Council. For the record, Fred Volz. These comments pertain to agenda item number 9 regarding a modified noise ordinance in Boulder City. 2 sections need additional modifications by city staff and this council. Under exemptions, section 7-6-6, the definition of civic functions does not address such instances as the overwhelming noise regularly generated in Veterans Memorial Park by skateboarders with boom boxes well into the night. It also does not address announcers using electronically boosted public address systems at the BMX park for several consecutive hours with music. Both of these instances could be construed to fall under the proposed exemptions for, quote, group use of public facilities, unquote, and, quote, public gatherings for which a license, permit, or contract is issued by the city for this activity, unquote. The repetitive and extended nature of these activities constitutes a noise nuisance for those who live on the east side of Buchanan. There are likely other similar instances of recurring noise nuisances around the city that are not just once-a-year occurrences and should not be given carte blanche to do whatever they please because someone at City Hall wishes to collect a fee. Under enforcement, Section 7-6-7, the unavailability of, as it's designated, authorized officials for much of a given week because of either the skewed open hours of city departments or the inability to reach a live person on a consistent basis bears attention. After regular business hours, at night, or over the 3-day city staff weekend, who will be specifically responsible for going out and measuring noise complaints? If this type of complaint is considered a non-emergency call at the police department, that means no one will appear until the next business day, which could be up to 4 days in the future, and long after the alleged nuisance and its perpetrators have disappeared. Will someone from community development be contacted at home to immediately investigate with the necessary measurement equipment? Will the police dispatcher send out an officer, and will every on-duty officer have the necessary measurement equipment called for in the ordinance? These situations need concrete procedures and resolution, not generalized language with no accountability for enforcement. And I would ask that these comments be added verbatim to the record of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone wishing to call for our initial public comment period? The phone number is 702-589-9629. This is the initial public comment period for City Council meeting. Anyone wishing to call in for the public comment, the phone number 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, were there comments emailed in?
Yes, I have 4 comments to read.
Please go ahead.
The first comment is from John Hunkel. If I mispronounce his name, I apologize. It's Hunkele. Greetings, Honorable Mayor and Council members. My name is John Hunkel. I live at 518 Ash Street, one of the 10 historic cottages directly facing the back patio of Big T's Cantina. You may have seen me on occasion out landscaping around the compound, which is something I do out of appreciation for the history of the cottages, the city itself, and out of respect for the owners who need to turn a profit while dealing with the challenges of maintaining a historic property. For an example of their commitment, all 10 cottages recently needed re-roofing after a major rain event, which turned into a 2-year ordeal. Instead of slapping up tar shingles like many, the owners had the original Gladding McBeam tiles carefully taken off and put back in place. The special underlayment chosen due to the wind exposure, low pitch of the roof, and nature of the tiles should last a lifetime. That the roofs all had to be dealt with at once and were completed without a dime of grant money speaks to the commitment of the owners and the respect they deserve. So what does this have to do with the sound ordinance? The answer is that is best explained by a visit we had from a local business owner who walked over one day During a lull in the conversation, his eyes wandered around the courtyard, taking in the surroundings. After a moment, he commented, "There is a good feeling here." So true, yes, there is a good feeling here. However, when Big T's fires up their karaoke on Friday nights, all that vanishes. On Saturday nights, when the drummers bang away with abandon, we have to make arrangements to be out of town, go elsewhere, or end up aggravating the dispatchers and police yet again. For months, we have been sweating it out, losing sleep, and having our lives disrupted while patiently waiting for the amended sound ordinance to be finalized. That there is a need for a stronger ordinance is disappointing. Like most Boulder City residents, we try to be good neighbors and don't expect much in return. Unfortunately, Big T's blatant disregard for us and the surrounding neighborhood, we hope the amended ordinance has teeth, is readily enforceable, and can resolve this heated issue peacefully. For the winter, it seems the cantina has taken their live music inside, like the rest of downtown establishments, but we have no reason to believe there is anything but temporary. I realize the ordinance is not designed strictly for us, but given what I've mentioned, I hope the current silence does not weaken anyone's resolve in it passing. In closing, let it be known that the tenants here at the cottages are fine with the ambient sounds that come with downtown living. We are not making extraordinary demands, just looking for a degree of civility. Thank you for your time. Respectfully, John Hunkel. Next comment is from Andrew Graff. Honorable Mayor and Council of Boulder City, I address you in support of Bill number 1910, proposing creation of a new Title VII, Chapter 6, referred to as the Boulder City Noise Ordinance. My name is Andy Graff. I'm an officer for the Navy's Military Sea Left Command and a historian of the American Revolution, drafting the fourth and final volume of narrative account. I live at 526 Ash Street, southernmost cottage of those built in the early 30s to house operators of Hoover Dam, and as it happens, the one most nearly adjacent to Big T's Cantina, now infamous among my fellow residents for the disruptive level of noise it routinely generates. As you might imagine, I chose Boulder City as my home for its own rich history and also for being an ideal place to write, which it was for many years, even in the heart of downtown. A thriving, vibrant, and viable commercial life for America's first planned community, which it enjoyed from the start, is what I firmly wish to see continue. Hence, I welcome new establishments of almost any stripe and wish them well accordingly. That restaurants and bars often play music is readily acknowledged by all of the Ash Street cottages. Living as we do right across from the town's business core, it is hardly a new phenomenon for us. What a reasonable person would consider excessive, however, as being likely to disturb adjacent homes, is what galvanizes us to defend the peace we hitherto enjoyed. I would assert that any business in town opting to play music, from classical to karaoke pop, can do so at a volume which does not disturb residents. Blasting music at a high decibel level to suit an owner's whim is neither justified nor required for the commercial success of their enterprise. Perhaps I look through nostalgic, rose-colored glasses when I posit that in former times, consideration for one's neighbors would prove a natural deterrent from acts tendering to hinder their quiet enjoyment of their premises. Whether or not the good old days were indeed that good, present experience does not reveal a growing lack of regard for others, if not common sense. It is for this reason that a noise ordinance seems necessary, one with objective, enforceable standards based upon logical tenets, such as Bill number 1910, which I urge adoption of in order to put this matter to rest at a stroke. Many thanks for your kind attention. Next public comment is from Stephen Morris regarding agenda item number 12. Once again, Mayor McManus has put the cart before the horse with the proposed special improvement district without any real understanding of how the law works and what the intended and unintended consequences of such an action may be. As we have seen before, the intent of the mayor's proposed action is most likely discriminatory and/or political in nature and will lead to liability for the city. This likely outcome is evidenced by the fact that the mayor's proposed agenda item fails to comply with NRS 271.325. With the mayor's retaliatory actions against past city officials that would have warned him against such actions, it is unlikely that the current staff has the mettle or the experience to advise the mayor against these types of actions. Therefore, the responsibility now lies with members of council to protect the city from ill-conceived actions of the mayor and his agents. Please reject Resolution 7384. Next public comment is regarding agenda item number 14 from Stephen Morris. The public needs to be aware of Mayor McManus's efforts to sabotage over a year and a half of work performed by the city clerk's and city attorney's office in conjunction with the nationally recognized provider in the Municipal Code Corporation, which is the largest codifier of legal documents for local governments in the United States, towards the recodification of the Boulder City Code. The Municipal Code Corporation was founded in 1951, and as of 2021, the company has served over 4,200 municipalities in 50 states. Please review the meeting minutes for the February 11th, 2020 City Council meeting to gain a better understanding of the work that has already been performed towards the recodification of the Boulder City Code. Furthermore, the mayor's agenda item lacks the specificity that is required by the open meeting law for the items that are of significant public concern. The mayor wants to direct the city attorney regarding the retention of outside counsel or a consultant to assist in amending certain sections of the Boulder City Code. However, the mayor fails and/or refuses to identify which certain sections of the Boulder City Code he is referring to. Why would the council spend more time and money towards something that has already been done? That's the end of my comments.
Thank you. Again, anyone in chambers who would like to make comment during this initial public comment period? All right, hearing no others, we will close the public comment period and move to approval of the regular agenda. Any changes, Madam City Clerk?
None.
Madam City Attorney?
No changes.
And Mr. City Manager?
No changes.
Thank you. Council, any changes for the regular agenda?
No changes.
Anyone wishing to make a motion then?
I move that we approve the regular agenda. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Oh,
Anyone opposed?
yeah.
We're getting there. We'll move to the consent agenda then. Madam City Clerk, any changes for the consent agenda?
No changes from my office, but I did want to bring up, there was a correction to page 1 of the special city council minutes for November 30th, 2021. It had Councilmember Jorgensen as calling in via phone, and she was actually here in person. No other changes.
Thank you. Madam City Attorney
No changes.
and Mr. City Manager?
Yes, I'd like to remove item number 3 from the agenda, and we'll be bringing that back at a future meeting.
Thank you. Any changes from members of council for the consent agenda?
No changes. No changes.
I will make the motion then to accept the consent agenda with the changes to the minutes and item number 3.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. We'll move then to item number 6, introduction of bill number 1911, ordinance of the City of Boulder City, amending Title 1, Chapter 9, Financial Administration. Mr. City Manager?
This is a bill introduction this evening, and City Clerk Tammy McKay will be handling that.
So we can have the reading, waive the reading except for title, please.
Somebody needs to introduce it first.
I will introduce bill number 1911,
Thank you.
and again, we can waive the reading except for title.
Bill number 1911, an ordinance of the City of Boulder City, Nevada, amending Title 1, Chapter 9, Financial Administration by amending Section 1-9-8-E to increase fund balance ceiling from prior year expenditures to 5% of the capital assets of the governmental funds as identified in the most recent annual comprehensive financial plan. And Bill number 1911 will be considered at the January 25th, 2022 City Council meeting.
Thank you. Item number 7 is another bill introduction, 1912, Ordinance of the City amending Title I, Chapter 9, Financial Administration. Again, I will introduce bill number 1912, request waiving of the reading except for title.
Thank you. Bill number 1912, an ordinance of the City of Boulder City, Nevada, amending Title I, Chapter 9, Financial Administration by amending Section 1-9-4-D to change the allocation of the lease revenues to the Vehicle Equipment Replacement Fund from 1 1/10% to 5 6/10%. Bill number 1912 will be considered at the January 25th, 2022 City Council meeting.
Thank you. Item number 8 is presentation regarding the Strategic Implementation Plan. Mr. City Manager.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Taylor Tedder, your City Manager here. Every quarter, staff updates you and the community on the city's strategic plan and its corresponding implementation plan. As a refresher, this plan came about in 2018 with the help of Management Partners, which has more than 25 years in government consulting. The city issued 2 surveys, one for residents and one for employees. Staff engaged with the public in 4 different workshops. 2 of the council workshops were held to develop the strategic plan, and 1 staff workshop set forth the strategies to meet the goals. In November of 2018, council members reaffirmed Boulder City's vision, mission, and core values. The vision statement is that aspirational statement of what the city leaders intend the city to be in the future and serves as the guiding principle for the services and programs the city provides and our plan to achieve. The vision statement reads as follows: the City of Boulder City is committed to preserving its status as a small town with a small town charm, historical heritage, and unique identity while proactively addressing our needs and enhancing our quality of life. The council also reaffirmed the mission statement, which provides our purpose, and that reads as follows: the City of Boulder City's mission is to deliver outstanding services to enhance the quality of life within our community, our economic vitality, and the safety of those who reside, work in, visit, or travel throughout our community. And finally, the core values establish the operating principles of an organization and govern the actions and behaviors of the policymakers and the employees. Those are accessible, caring, and responsible customer service, fiscal responsibility, integrity, professional excellence, transparent communication, and openness to innovation and technology. So we are over the halfway point of the plan, and I'm happy to report that we're about 60% to achieving the 5 goals, which include achieving prudent financial stewardship, which has 10 strategies, investment in infrastructure, which has 5 strategies, manage growth and development, 11 strategies, promote historic preservation, which has 8 strategies, and then sustain a high level of public safety services, which has 7 strategies. On the first goal, which is achieve prudent financial stewardship, 7 strategies are complete and they just need to remain stable. 3 strategies still need completion and could close out by the end of this year. Strategy 3, we'll be discussing that at the end of the presentation. We're requesting a revision based on NRS and city ordinance changes. Strategy 5, support nonprofit and volunteer groups. We've partnered with the Scouts on the Eagle Scout project at Veterans Park. We've coordinated several nonprofit special events and partnered with Endow on educational programs at Veterans Park. Moving on to invest in infrastructure. Strategy 1, prioritize capital improvement plan projects to address health and safety while maximizing available funds. The plan, which was developed in late summer and fall, received tentative approval for the financial year 23 budget at the last City Council meeting of 2021. And then strategy 2, maximize the use of outside funding sources for infrastructure. The Tract 350 RFP was completed, vendor was selected and approved by council, and negotiations are ongoing. We'll be submitting a funding request with RTC for the construction portion of the Railroad Museum Road project, and the city secured funding from RTC for the Boulder City Parkway Shade Structure project. The next goal, managing growth and development. On strategy 1, identify opportunities for new and small business development that will provide a diverse revenue stream with minimal impact on the quality of life. The city held a meeting with our solar partners in September to look for ways to support each other and develop synergy with similar industries. And there's more on that in the background working. So that was a positive meeting. Moving on to historic preservation promotion. Strategy 4, amend existing codes to achieve historic preservation goals. The Historic Preservation Ordinance Ad Hoc Committee met 4 times last year. They prepared a draft plan that was presented at 2 public open houses in June. The city's received State Historic Places Office's feedback and plans to reconvene the committee beginning in 2022. And then strategy 8, identify historic buildings to repurpose and reuse. LGA is currently working on the historic structural report and treatment plan that'll be completed by February of 22. And the last but certainly not least goal to update you on this evening is sustain a high level of public safety services. Strategy 1 is to recruit and retain highly trained public safety staff. And on the fire department side, the fire department recently completed the annual Fire Cadet Academy with 7 cadets and 1 National Park Ranger graduating. So the 7 cadets will be offered reserve firefighter positions. And then strategy 6, communicate and celebrate the low crime rate and other service excellence. And on the police department side, we've had positive media interactions, including sharing details about the arrests of 2 men that were driving through Boulder City with a pipe bomb, stopping a driver in a rented Lamborghini, doing 150 miles an hour on I-11, just days after the fatal accident in Las Vegas involving a former football player, as well as the Know Your Limit campaign in October to educate drivers about their blood alcohol levels. The fire department is reporting response performance monthly in their bi-monthly report from the city manager to you as the city council. And when it was decided to hold the National Night Out virtually during an increase in COVID cases, the police department allowed us to make a video about the mounted unit, and the fire department gave us an in-depth look at Engine 121. So that was a nice way to still connect with children and residents while we still had to remain distant. So as I wrap up the presentation, I encourage everyone to check out the plan as well as the many implementation plan updates at bcnv.org/stratplan. And with that, I'll take any questions or comments at this point, and then I'll move on to item B.
Thank you. Questions or comments from council? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge it's wonderful how well strategic planning works. From top down of developing goals, having a mission. I used to teach this stuff. Having a mission, having a vision, having a set of goals and strategies, and finally watching the implementation of them. It warms my heart. I just had to say that. And to have it articulated very well by both of you, Lisa LaPlante and City Manager. Thank you very much for the update.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. Of course, thanks all around to staff for everything that they're doing to help us reach these goals. I'm happy to see that it looks like the Ad Hoc Historic Preservation Committee will be resuming here shortly. My question was with regards to, as we're seeing there at about a 60% completion rate. As we near, meeting these goals, of course, some of them are always going to be ongoing. I think last time it was said that it took us about 8 months to develop this plan that we're working on now. At what point do you think will we start to consider that type of action also so that there's not really a lull, that we are creating kind of a rolling strategic plan so that there's not, these huge gaps? I guess what I'm asking, would we be looking at it so that starting in 2025, we would be starting on the next one?
Right, so you're right, this plan does go to 2025, and we do believe that it would take about 8 months to develop a new plan. So we would start that process before the end date of this plan and keep it seamless and make sure that we're continuing to achieve our goals and make the quality of life better for the residents.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? I had a couple of things, well, actually a few things. Strategy, Goal A, achieve prudent financial stewardship. Strategy 2. There were a couple of grants listed there, but I believe that within that period that this covers, the fire department had obtained a grant for replacement of their air packs. I think that's a great thing to point out, that type of work is being done. The support for nonprofit and volunteer groups. We are going to talk later this evening about emergency aid, support for them. But the ongoing support we've had for Lend a Hand and the Senior Center, I think those are things that, we get used to doing that, but to keep in mind that those are things that really benefit the community, working with groups like that, in addition to, I believe it was the Jamboree that was mentioned in there. Goal B, invest in infrastructure. Strategy 1, prioritize capital improvement plan to address health and safety while maximizing available funds. I believe that the role that the Utility Advisory Committee has served in that process has been essential to getting us where we're at. Certainly the hiring of a new utilities director, I think, is going to continue to improve that. Strategy 3, prepare and update source documents to guide and inform the capital improvement plan. It was pointed out in there the use of the Stantec report. I think there are some serious issues with that report. There were some of the buildings that were being reviewed, the information was just incorrect. It just simply was not as was stated in the report. So I think that report really needs to be scrutinized before having that serve as the basis for a lot of decisions. Goal C, manage growth and development. The city has seen significant growth over the past several years with the completion of the cottages and the Boulder Hills developments, the pending development of the Boulder Creek land. Those developments will have increased the number of residential units here in Boulder City by 5 to 10% in a fairly short period of time. One of the stated goals, and I believe it's been on there for some time, is about looking for additional land. What has happened, especially over the past couple of years, conditions on the Colorado River have really become stark. And I think that needs to figure into the equation. It's really not mentioned as one of the goals. But SNWA has already imposed a water emergency on the Colorado River. That's something, again, I think needs to be factored into any decisions we may have regarding the management of growth and development. That even when this plan was developed a few years ago, wasn't as stark of a problem as it currently is. Another issue with managing growth and development, about half of our electricity comes from Hoover Dam. That appears to be, not threatened right now, but that's very low-cost energy compared to other sources. And every time that we have development here in Boulder City, we cannot get any more of that power from Hoover Dam. All of the power has been contracted for, so we have to go out and purchase more expensive power. So as we look at how other things may come to be, again, I think that should be one of the strategies that becomes part of the management of growth and development, is to scrutinize what type of power usage any additional growth or development may come into play. I know one of the things that has been suggested a few times is a data center. Data centers tend to be very power intensive, and having something like that will require that our residents pay more for their power. Strategy 9 in that goal for managed growth and development is the wayfinding signs. Mr. Tedder, do you know where we're at in that process? It's something that's already been discussed for a couple of years, and I know there have been examples that have been provided.
Yeah, last I heard, about a month ago, they were working on that. So I'll get you a better update and bring that to you very soon.
Thank you. 'Cause, again, I think that, that will help some of the businesses that maybe are not on Nevada Way, have people, we have seen folks come out here to Boulder City with our open space that we have here, the open air that we have in the commercial district. A lot of people are out walking around, and I think being able to direct them to some of those other businesses that may not be as easy to find would be beneficial for them. Goal D, promote historic preservation. Strategy 4, to amend the existing code. You had mentioned that the State Historic Preservation Office has returned their comments regarding the model ordinance that was amended by the ad hoc committee. Again, I think this is one of those things that if you go to many places in the United States, you will find that they have historic preservation ordinances. Here in Boulder City, we've never had one that had any real ability to achieve historic preservation. I think that's an essential thing. I'm happy that the SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, has returned their comments. I look forward to being able to look at that and see what their thoughts are. This is something that's essential for this community. The identity of the community, the economic goals of this community are very much revolve around that historic preservation. I know Mr. Tedder and I had talked with some folks this afternoon about the Railroad Museum. It's another example of how there are things here that can be preserved that act as an attraction and economic driver for this community. And the more of those things we lose, we will not get them back. So I look forward to seeing that process move forward on review of that ordinance and consideration by the council. Strategy 5 was to identify financial incentives to promote historic preservation. We have last year created a grant program within the RDA. That has already been utilized, but there was also a grant program that had been approved for residential properties. Do we know where we're at with that?
I'm not sure where we're at on that, but I will find out.
Okay. Again, I think that, that fits hand in glove with all of the efforts, and that particular grant program was designed so that if preserving the architectural features of the exterior of a home would cost more than, typical construction now, that there may be some grant money available for that difference to really effectuate preservation of the architecture of especially some of our original homes here in Boulder City. Lastly, Goal E, sustain a high level of public safety services. Congratulations on the work that the fire department has been doing with their study, their training and all that. We recently were notified that the ISO rating for the city was increased. I believe we went from a 4 to a 3, if I'm
That's correct.
So that's an improvement, but there's also discussion about significantly increasing the number of personnel for the fire department. And when we look at the number of calls of various types that we've seen over the past 5 years, that doesn't seem to be increasing. We've got an improvement in an ISO rating. I know that Chief Gray has presented information on goals that are set by national organizations. I really think we also need to look at what are the goals that are stated for the number of firefighters per capita, the number of vehicles per capita, that type of thing. I think that if we get too far beyond what those types of goals are, the improvement of service to our residents doesn't really improve that greatly beyond where we're at now, and it's certainly going to cost an awful lot of money. So I think we need to very carefully look at what other communities have. One of the things that I found was departments down in the Vegas area, and certainly they're not necessarily the same type of organizations. They have one fire station per approximately 30,000 population. If we were to build another station here, we would have one per 8,000 population. I really think we need to take a very critical look at that. Would increasing a few personnel, as we did a couple of years ago, help to improve it? Or do we need this multi-million-dollar effort that's being discussed, but is yet to be budgeted for? And the police department, in those goals, they mentioned the communications upgrades. We've seen throughout too many tragedies where a breakdown in communications does not improve the outcome of those tragedies. I think that's very much worthwhile looking at, that as our officers or firefighters are out away from town, because we do have over 200 square miles of town here, that communications be at a very high level to allow for adequate responses. So that was what I had. Unless someone has anything else, then we will move on to Mr. Mays.
I think I've got an answer for you.
Oh, well.
Just 1 second.
Good evening, Mayor and members of City Council. The question was raised regarding where city staff is at with respect to the City Council approved $100,000 grant for the Historic District for residential properties in the district. Staff has been working with the Historic Preservation Committee over the last several meetings, and they have been providing their input in the guidelines for the grant program. We are hopeful that at the January meeting this month, we will finalize their recommendations so we can present it to the council in February for consideration.
That's great news. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, moving on to the revision of Goal A, Strategy 3. So the current goal strategy reads, ensure budget reserves are 20% of all funds. So we are requesting that we align that to our current policy, which is ensure budget reserves are 16.67% of the general fund and 20% for all other operating funds. The reason for this change is due to NRS 354.6421, which changed from the 20% to the 16.67 guideline for the general fund balance maximum, and it's not subject to any negotiations. The council adopted the change in June of 2020 through Ordinance 1647, and so that's why, as staff, we're requesting that change right now.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? I will make a motion then to approve the change as proposed by staff.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 9, for possible consideration, Bill 1910, an ordinance of the City of Boulder City. This was an item that I have requested consideration for. I appreciate the work that Madam City Attorney and our also substitute City Attorney Michael O. had done on this. Without question, this is the generator of significant complaints from residents. I have certainly heard it for a period of time. That is why I'm bringing this forward at this time. I think that the attorneys have worked very hard to come up with an ordinance that is enforceable, still provides for people to enjoy their property, but addresses a situation where people are literally losing their property rights by the actions of others. You know, I've heard from a resident who actually lost the sale of her home because a contract had been signed and the prospective owners happened to come out to Boulder City for dinner on a weekend night. When they heard the level of noise that would be experienced at the home, they called Monday morning and canceled that contract for sale. We've heard in public comment earlier that people are literally having to leave their homes on weekends because of the noise that's being generated. And I don't want to make this all about the uptown businesses, because there are other sources of noise that are also addressed in this ordinance. Madam City Attorney, any comments or explanations you would like to make regarding the ordinance?
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I don't have any comments to make with respect to the ordinance, other than to say that if it's passed by council tonight, I do believe that it would be enforceable and provides both an objective and reasonable person standard of enforcement with factors to measure what the reasonable person standard should look like. I will just point out in the packet, there are 2 amendments. The first is a proposed amendment by Councilman Adams. This would add a musical instrument used at a residence as an exemption during the hours of 7 and 8 p.m. and also adds a definition of musical instrument. There is an amendment proposed by Mayor McManus. This amendment amends the a bill that, as it was introduced at the previous meeting, and makes a few changes, much of which are cleanup changes, for example, removing some definitions that weren't used in the actual body of the ordinance, so there wasn't really a need to define those terms. It also defines the term domestic power tool and the term transient lodging facility for purposes of more clear enforcement. It also removed just some of the unnecessary jargon. For example, in section 76.4, there was some standards in there for the noise measurements that aren't particularly needed for enforcement. So those were removed. And in addition, it was clarified that in this amendment that the reasonable person standard of measurement would only be used if a sound meter was not available. So that those clarifying changes were made. There's also an additional exemption for landscape maintenance work approved by the city pursuant to a permit or contract during the hours of 4:30 a.m. until 7 p.m. Currently we do have with our golf course maintenance contract, we have they are required to not start earlier than 4:30 a.m., but during the summer months, they have to start early in the morning to maintain the golf courses here. In addition, and so that's the essentially the changes that were made to the bill that was introduced.
Thank you. And it's been noted in the staff report as well that the problems with the existing ordinance have been known for many years, but were never addressed by the previous city attorney. This is a problem for residents. I believe it certainly needs to be addressed. Councilman Adams, I think that many of the, I think there's only one difference between the amendments that you had proposed and that I had proposed, and that's regarding musical instruments. Did you want to address that?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. With regards to, there are exemptions, as has been pointed out, for power tools and for other things that can be demonstrably oppressive sound-wise. My thought process was that, you know, if Joe down the street is running his table saw or power drill to, repair, build, fix, as he needs, that, little Joey down the street should be able to practice his scales on his French horn in the backyard as well. Or that a family could have a barbecue in their backyard and have guests over and have the stereo on, and have basically, so that we're not criminalizing behavior that might be deemed an annoyance, but not necessarily criminal or oppressive or dangerous behavior. And I put down times on there that I felt would be reasonable. I did have, I've put a lot of thought and work into this. I did have another amendment that I think might actually be more clear and doesn't allow for potential abuses within an exemption for musical instruments, which could essentially allow a rock band to play in someone's backyard, which is not the idea that I had in my mind. For those who don't know, I worked as a rock musician, and I also got my degree in deaf studies. So I think I have a pretty unique perspective on what we're talking about. I've got experience and I have the education. Over 10 years ago, my ears started ringing, and they never stopped. I know firsthand the damage that can be caused by noise. Callings aside, I chose the line of work, right? People do not necessarily always have the opportunity of choice where they live. So as a governing body, it's important for us to make sure that where people live, they have a certain level of expectation that the city does what it can to mitigate things that could produce a public health risk to them. That being said, we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to be sure that we are being reasonable to protect the health and welfare of our community while also allowing a certain amount of freedom. I think to be sure we do that, everyone needs to understand the levels that we're talking about. We're talking about measurements in decibels, right? So decibels work in factors of 10. It's logarithmic. So and the human hearing perceives that loudness to double every 10 decibels. So a good example would be when you have 10 violins playing at 70 decibels, that is actually going to be perceived as twice as loud as one violin playing at 70 decibels, meaning you're going to actually be hearing 80 decibels worth of volume from those 10 violins. The OSHA has acknowledged that decibel levels 85 or over, exposure of 8 hours or more, that's when damage and the health risk starts to set in. And every 3 decibels above that 85, you have that exposure time. So by the time we're talking about 90 decibels, you're talking about 2 hours before damage can set in. When you start pressing 100 or more, 30 minutes, 15 minutes before damage. And I just think it's important that we all understand the numbers that we're talking about. As I stated before, we do have exemptions in here for some of the loudest, most obstructive noise in power tools, construction. We've all come to accept that these are typical noises that to be experienced. Another amendment that I would ask to be considered, at least here, at council and just to hear the opinions would be to change the definition of daytime so that the following periods of so that it would read the following periods of time between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Sunday through Thursday and 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. Friday and Saturday. And the definition of nighttime to be changed to the following periods of time between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. Sunday through Thursday and 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. Friday and Saturday. And then essentially having two noise timetables. One would be weekday maximum sound level table, which would look identical to what is in our packet right now. That would be in effect Monday through Thursday, and then or Sunday through Thursday, and then a weekend maximum level, which would increase the level in residential and noise-sensitive use to 80, and would reduce it back down to 70 at nighttime, with commercial and industrial use maintaining the same use as it is currently at 100 during the day and 90 during the evening. For reference, 80 decibels is a garbage disposal. That's about as loud as a garbage disposal. It's about half as loud as a leaf blower, which we are saying is permissible. So at that level, at 80 decibels, if you're in your front yard and you have 80 decibels in front of you, it also means that you should be able to to place yourself inside and protect yourself from more of that noise. That doesn't mean in every situation that that's possible, but more or less, that is half, 80 decibels is half the level of other permissible uses that we have come to accept. I feel that it's reasonable and it allows a certain amount of freedom for our neighbors and for businesses to use their property in a respectful way, but also keeps it below that 85 decibel level that can really start to produce damage in shorter periods of time. And that way the residents know that if there is sound being generated that can cause health risks, that there is a means for the city to stop it. So I would ask that be considered. And I also would ask for Madam City Attorney's impression or thoughts on such an amendment.
Yes, absolutely. I would just say that because this is the bill draft, if it would need significant changes in order to make the public aware what is exactly changing. The changes you described, I took notes, but I do believe that those are would need to be put in text, reviewed to make sure that those capture your intent, and then would have to be brought forward in a future bill. I don't think that that those changes are too substantive to make at this time during the meeting. If it was a small change, like changing a time, to a earlier or later time, or striking a word or adding a word here and there, I think that's something we could do this evening, but the changes that you're describing, I do think would take more time, and we'd have to bring the bill back later.
I'd like to address some of that. One, I think if you look under other noise disturbance, there is a section in there under B that talks about the nature and land use of the area within which the noise complaint originates. In other words, what that says to me is whether we're talking about a residential area or something where it's more open, commercial area. The density of the inhabitation of the area within which the noise complaint originates. Again, that's part of, are people in their homes, or is there an expectation that if you go into, say on Industrial Road, you may hear louder noises in an area like that than you would expect in a residential area. The time of day or night, and that is addressed by defining what those times are. Getting to 10 p.m., I think you're going to find a lot of folks feel that 10 p.m. is probably a little bit too late for them. The duration of the noise and its tonal, informational, or musical content, once again, as we look at those exemptions for power tools and whatnot, if somebody's working at their home and they're using a table saw or a chainsaw, the expectation is that activity is not going to be continuous, is not going to last a long period of time. It may serve as somewhat of an irritant to their neighbors, but somebody is not expected to be out there on a relatively continuous basis, whereas some other noises that do continue for a long period of time, and I believe that gets addressed here as to whether that continues for that long period of time, whether it's continuous, recurrent, or intermittent. I think that's all part of the determination that's made as to whether you're infringing on someone else's property rights. So I think there are some things that really are not working for the majority of citizens as we say, well, we can up this, we can go till 10 o'clock at night, we can up these dB levels to levels that are considered to be damaging to people's hearing if they occur for a long period of time. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Jorgensen?
Thank you, Mayor. I just have a couple concerns. I think we can see it's kind of evident, just even up here, as we will have 5 people discussing the noise ordinance, that there can be a variety of opinions or ideas or thoughts as far as time goes, as far as decibel levels, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. There is no way to include every single thing that could make a noise inside of this noise ordinance. But I think that that's initially why we said we were going to seek public feedback. And I think that's my main concern here. If among 5 people up here we could have differing opinions and thoughts, then there has to also be among the citizens differing thoughts and opinions. Though I heard you say majority, I have not received a majority, what I would consider to be a majority of the population of Boulder City's input on this. We've yet, I think, to reach out, have we?
Staff has not had a chance to reach out to the community with regard to the ordinance draft.
And that was initially something that we stated, right, that would happen?
Well, let's back up just a moment. The reason this is before us this evening is this bill was introduced almost 30 days ago. It appeared in the newspaper, it appeared on the agenda. It has been issued to the public as something that is going to be discussed, and there has been feedback from the community in response to that. So to say that we haven't reached out for public comment, that's the reason we do bill introductions and then wait for a period of time before we actually discuss the bill. So it has been put out to the public.
Okay, and I appreciate that input. What I'm thinking here is that the amount of public input that we've had the ability to get maybe would be significant for us in that they could help us. I mean, I just listening to what James's expertise in this area is has been helpful for me. Listening to some of the complaints that I've heard up to this point has been, and I feel for the people that aren't able to stay in their homes, but I think that this is something that if we put it in to writing, and it's enforceable, which I think we need to give the police department something that is more enforceable. But I would hate to see us rush into judgment when I recognize that you think we've had public input, but I myself do not think that we've had enough public input at this point.
Again, I would point out in the staff report that it has been known to prior city attorneys that this ordinance needed amending. So once again, I do understand that some of the members of council have only been here about 6 months or so, but this problem goes back for a number of years, which is why that evaluation is in the staff report, that this is a known problem. This is something that has been going on for a long period of time. This is not something that's been pulled out of thin air. We had the current city attorney look at this and prepare a draft. We had the substitute city attorney, who's from another city, also draw upon his experience with a similar type of ordinance for the city of Henderson. This is not something that just fell out of the sky upon us. And as far as enforcement goes, again, I know I've spoken with Chief Shea, I know the city attorney has. Again, this is not something that has been rushed. It is something where discussions have been held for a long period of time to arrive at where we are at this evening.
Right, and though I have only been sitting up here for 6 months, I have lived here for 23 years, almost 24, and been a member of the community. And I think that that's what this addresses, right? The quality of life for people within this community. So I hesitate again to push forth something before they've had a chance for input.
Thank you. Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, as much as I do appreciate having the idea of a workshop, I have to say that coming from my own experience, I live across the street from Bicentennial Park, and during the year there are several parades. There's Art in the Park, there's Worst Fest, there's Jamboree. There are events that go. And I recognize that by buying the house that we bought, that I would be subjected to, tens of thousands of people over a weekend making a lot of noise. And I can accept that. And I don't necessarily need that regulated. I've also, when we lived in California, lived at home, lived across the street from a musical Christmas house that played Trans-Siberian Railway music from 6 o'clock until 10 o'clock every night for 6 weeks. And as cars drove by, they could turn their radios to a station and sit there and play it. And when we complained, we were told by the police department that there was nothing that they had done according to the ordinance, that there was nothing, they could not enforce any existing noise ordinance. And so there were times we had to leave home. We could not sit in our living room and read a book on those nights. So having been on both ends, there are two things. I support the idea of a noise ordinance because I know the passion in which people have approached me and what I think about it. But there are two things that I think are important, and one is, and I know it's addressed, is specific distance from homes. I know what they're talking about on Ash Street, being right across the street from that patio. And there's no reason why somebody should not be able to enjoy their home on a Saturday night. I understand music, I understand living near Nevada Way, but to have that as, it's a threat and it is a quality of life. The other is, and this is the bane of my existence, is gas leaf blowers. And I think that whether they're commercial or they're, private owners and they're landscapers, that there needs to be specific times of operation that are weather or are time of year dependent. I understand they don't want to be out blowing leaves around at midday in August. But that to me is not, maybe not decibels, but that is certainly an annoyance. So I would like to have specific distance from homes, and again, decibel levels I think are really important. And addressing the issue of landscaping, both commercial and personal landscaping noises. I think those, to me, those are the two major complaints that I hear is blowers and the loudness of music in specific neighborhoods. And that's it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Fox?
Yeah, I agree with Councilman Adams. We do need to look at some of the times and days and make some adjustments. And I do agree with Councilman Jorgensen on getting more public comment. We definitely need to get more of the residents and some of the business owners together and see, to get some more specifics. That way everybody's happy.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. I do have one question that I would just like clarified, because we do, it is said that it'll be considered the origination of the source of the sound, right? So if it's originating from a commercial use, but when I look at the maximum permissible sound level table, it says receiving land use. So I would assume that to mean that the maximum sound level to be considered for where the complaint essentially is for where the complaint is originating, where they are receiving. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the receiving land, the sound level meter would measure the noise at the receiving land use. If the noise exceeds the maximum permissible sound level, then the originating source could be found in violation of the statute.
And if we have, say, a residential area in which the ambient environmental sound is at or above 70 decibels, how can you ever differentiate between additional causes? Because the way sound works is it continues to add on. You can't drown out sound with more sound. It always increases the volume. But if you have an area where the ambient noise level is at or above 70, how do you differentiate then when somebody is causing a disturbance and when they're not?
Under this version of the ordinance, it doesn't take into account the ambient. So if the ambient noise is at the residence is always above the maximum permissible level, then there would always be a violation. The ambient noise is always taken into account, of course, when deciding whether there's a violation at all. And that's why the reasonable Persian standard is so important, is because we can look not only at the offending noise, but we can also look at the ambient noise, and we can make a determination as to, how that impacts whether there's a disturbance or not, and as a factor to consider. So I would just say yes, under this version of the ordinance, if the ambient noise was always above the maximum permissible sound level, then there would always be a violation.
And I'm not saying that I believe that there are many places where this is, or that it would even be the case throughout entire portions of the day. But I do think when we have certain areas that are right adjacent to commercial areas, that it is probably pretty common that the ambient noise, not just coming from loudspeakers or anything like that, but the ambient noise level might actually be above 70, because that's not that loud. That's the sound of traffic driving down the street, basically. And so as soon as you start to add on top of that, that's when you start to add on to additional sound. So it's something to consider. I absolutely think we need to get something passed here, and I think as soon as possible is necessary to help protect our residents from health concerns. I appreciate all of the comments about, more public outreach, but I do also agree that, within that time, not only have I received a number of emails and outreach from the community, but I also took the time to reach out to others in the community to get an idea of where they are, so not just from one particular part of town. But there is a point where it doesn't matter how much public outreach we have, there is a point in time where volume and noise becomes a public health assessment. And there should be a certain level where we say, this is not, no matter how much the people say we want, it can be deafening as loud as it wants. And I'm not saying that that's what we would get, but I am saying that there is a definition of what is considered to be safe and unsafe sound levels. And we have that information. That information doesn't change based on public input. So I just would hope that we all consider that. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to correct my prior statement. I was thinking of an earlier version of the ordinance. It does address when there is existing ambient noise level that exceeds the maximum permissible sound level. If that's the case, then the maximum permissible sound level is deemed to be 3 decibels above the ambient noise level.
Okay.
So I apologize. I was thinking of an earlier version. This does address that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Again, I would point out too that this isn't new, okay? There is an existing sound ordinance. So this isn't as though something new is being introduced to the city of Boulder City. There is an existing sound ordinance. The problem with that ordinance is it's not clear, and this is a clarification of that. And with that then, I will make a motion to approve Bill number 1910 with the amendments that I had proposed, with the addition of musical instruments for exceptions that Councilmember Adams had put in. And once again, I want to point out that these exceptions, while they may be allowed, they're not allowed as continuous or these are going to be intermittent uses for property. So with that amendment, time of day and night remaining the same as the amendment that I had proposed, I move for approval of Bill 1910 with those amendments. Anyone wishing to second that motion?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
No more discussion?
If you would like to,
Yes,
please
I would
proceed.
like to, again, I would like to go back to specifically landscaping noise and have a different time in the summer and in the winter. I think that's important because, and also, and this probably can't be changed, that just because it's city landscaping and they're out there at 6 a.m. blowing nothing around with a gas leaf blower, I just think that it's important that certain times of morning, especially if it's not going to be hot that day, that they shouldn't be out there at 6 o'clock in the morning with the gas blower. So if there could be an adjustment to the time of day for landscaping, for landscaping noise.
The amendment that is included in the packet that I had proposed sets the time of day for daytime of 7 a.m.
7 a.m.
to 9 p.m.
Okay.
Without regard to winter, summer, it just remains the same throughout the year, 7 a.m. to 9 p.m.
But it said that city-approved commercial landscaping is exempt from that?
Work that's being done via city contracts.
Okay, because it says that landscape.
And Mr. Tedder would be happy to handle any complaints from residents if...
Yes, I would. And that provision's in there because it does take a long time to take care of the golf courses. So any city work is in there as an exemption.
Okay.
Yes, the landscape maintenance exemption is only for city, either city permitted or contract work between the hours of 4:30 a.m. and 7 p.m.
Any other discussion? All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Motion passes 3-2. Thank you. Move to item number 10, Resolution 7382, declaring a municipal election. Madam City Clerk.
Thank you. Per the Boulder City Charter and NRS 293C.110 states the conduct of city elections are controlled by the governing body. Therefore, I'm asking that resolution number 7382 be approved to declare the municipal primary election will be held on the 14th day of June 2022, and a municipal general election will be held on the 8th day of November 2022 in Boulder City. Per NAC 293C.060 requires the city clerk publish a notice no later than February 15 of each year, designating the offices which are up for election. Since we've aligned with the county, they are actually publishing all of the legal notices in English, Spanish, and Tagalog. And as a courtesy, I will still publish the notice in the Boulder City Review.
Thank you. Any questions or comments regarding Resolution 7382? Anyone wishing to make a motion?
I move that we pass Resolution 7382.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, Madam City Clerk. Move to item number 11, Resolution 7383, repealing Resolution 6728. Mr. City Manager?
Yes, Bryce Bolt, our Administrative Services Director, will be handling this item related to the Civil Service Commission, and he's put a lot of work into this one.
Thank you, sir. Firstly, you have before you two handouts relative to this item. One would be a resolution which makes it clear this is a repeal and replace. And the second item would be, the original text had a blue text box, and then the text continued thereafter. To ensure that it's a part of the text, we moved that blue text box into the actual text, and most of that falls under scope. So with those two items, what you have is revisions to the civil service rules and regulations. And previously there was a lot captured in our civil service rules and regulations. These revisions make it clear that who they apply to, who they don't apply to, and we meet the requirements of the charter. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions or comments? I will say, you know, when I first looked at this, I honestly thought that there were pages missing because we went from, 12, 13 sections down to 2. But as I read through that, I was not in favor of the revisions that had been proposed earlier. There were significant issues with those I believe were in contradiction to the city charter. I think this greatly simplifies that. My understanding is that some of the elements that were in the previous suggestion had to do more with HR manual type things rather than civil service rules and regulations.
Yes, sir. Yeah, again, I try to capture too much in one package, and this would be much, much cleaner, and we'll have a policy separate.
And it should be pointed out, this is a requirement of the city charter. The city charter requires that we have civil service rules and regulations. And if you look at that section of the charter, I think you have this back to where it's addressing those provisions within the charter, and HR guidelines are going to be addressed in a separate manual for employees.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions or comments? All right, I will move for approval then of Resolution 7383.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, Mr. Bolt.
Thank you, sir.
Item number 12, Resolution 7384, a resolution of the City Council of Boulder City authorizing staff to proceed with the steps necessary to create a special improvement district for the purpose of undertaking the cost of certain local improvements related to the development of Tract 350. This is an item that I had requested to be considered. The Tract 350 is the land around the Boulder Creek Golf Course. It has been established that a storm drain channel is going to be a necessity in that area to handle the runoff. That could have been addressed, or at least begun to be addressed when the Boulder Hills development went in. It was not, and so we are at a place now where the council has accepted a request for proposal or RFP for the Boulder Creek land, and there's going to be an expense. And who is going to pay for it is the question. You know, there's an old saw that growth pays for growth. I believe growth should pay for growth, and that's why I've asked for consideration of this this evening. The estimates are that this channel could be $1 million, $1.5 million, and there have been proposals that, well, the developer would do it and pay the city less, $1 million less, or $1.5 million less, or the city could do it. Well, the fact is that this channel is going to benefit the residents in that area. It is certainly a common thing that occurs that these types of assessment districts are created so that the landowners or the people who become the landowners are going to be responsible for the infrastructure that allows for development of that area. So that is what this item is about, is to ask the city staff to provide for some information on how those types of things might be developed. We are not, at this time, this evening, trying to adopt a specific plan for this. We are only asking city staff to come up with the steps necessary that would be able to create such a district for discussion and possible adoption at a later time. Madam City Attorney, I don't know if you had any comments. I know that a person who had input previously, Public Works Director Keegan Littrell, is not available this evening. Is there anything that you would like to comment on this?
Both Taylor and I are available to answer questions from council. I would say if this resolution moves forward, this is the first step. The proposal with regard to Track 350 does include, the developer has agreed to make these improvements. So if this resolution were to move forward, we would start the process. So there are several ways you can create a special improvement district. It's outlined by NRS Chapter 271. So city staff would still have to comply with that process and go forward. So this would delay installing those improvements. This also does change the award to the with regard to Track 350. So we would have to ensure the awardee is comfortable with still moving forward with the development of Track 350. If not, we would have to redo the RFP. But so that would be the implications if this resolution were to move forward.
I do think that, you know, the statement that this will delay something, you know, currently all we've done is to accept a request for proposal. We have not signed an agreement for the sale of land yet. That's still pending at this time. So no sale has occurred, no work could begin on this. Is that correct?
That's correct, but if we were to move forward with the SID, we would have to determine how to do that, you know, whether we would be issuing a bond and going into debt. If there's debt necessary, then there needs to be voter approval. In addition, there's steps in NRS 271 that we have to take, we may have to take. There's a public protest period is possible. There's several ways to create a SID. This would be done likely by development agreement. I'm not sure if the public protest period applies. Even if it does, it's only one property owner, which we're the property owner, so I don't, unless we would include other properties. So there's just several moving parts. I think that when I say it would delay, it would because we'd have to create the special improvement district to begin those improvements. So that, you know, that would, whereas the developer right now could just go ahead and make those improvements. So that's what I meant by the delay of making the improvements.
Well, and again, I think when, you know, the consideration is, well, the developer could just go ahead with it. Well, the developer's not just going to go ahead with it, right? I mean, the developer's already said this is going to cost $1 million. That was the figure that the developer put out there. So it's not as though, well, I'll just have a couple of guys, you know, take some time and they'll go ahead and put in the storm drain channel. The developer has made that statement that he would expect that the purchase price of the land would be reduced by $1 million.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which means that the residents of Boulder City are down $1 million in revenue, should this go forward that way.
There would also be additional costs for the special improvement district, as far as, it also, I don't know what the cost would be to the city. There are also different laws that apply with construction projects to the city, for example, prevailing wage requirements and things like that. So I don't know that the cost for us to build the stormwater improvement would be the same as, in any case, you'd still recoup those costs from the property owner.
Well, and that's the point, is who's going to pay this? Who's going to pay this $1 million to $1.5 million that's been estimated? Is it the residents of Boulder City? We know it's not going to be the developer. The developer's not going to pay $1 million for the privilege. So whether it's the developer taking less money or the city going ahead, it's the residents of Boulder City who lose this revenue, unless the future property owners have an assessment placed on their properties to pay for this project.
I'm not sure what you're looking for me.
Well, again, the comment that you've made a couple of times is that somehow this is not going to cost the residents of Boulder City, and I think that's what this resolution is about, is to find out how we can go about doing that, because these special improvement districts are common in Nevada. Is that, have you had any previous experience with them?
I haven't personally dealt with an SID. I have contacted the county to determine how they go about creating an SID. And my understanding is these are typically used for multi-million-dollar projects, and we usually use a third party that would assess those fees and then collect them for the city is typically how it was used. I make no representation about the costs to the taxpayers. I do agree that the developer is paying less for the property because in order to do the improvements, in general too, the cost of the improvements will likely exceed $1 million, and typically costs of improvements are passed on to the home buyer later.
And again, that there's a law out there that specifies that, because these types of things are used in these types of projects.
SIDs are used to make stormwater improvements, yes.
Okay, and again, what this resolution is about this evening is to make the request to staff to tell the city council what would be involved in this according to state law and general practices within the industry.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Bridges?
Yes. First of all, I have to say that I believe this is contrary to the agreement, to the RFP. On the offer that came in from Toll Brothers, I know it was discussed that we would accept or consider the option that it would be $1 million less, and yet they would pay for the improvement. And we had that discussion, and it sounded like a decision was made. The fact is that it would also delay development. It would cost, and I'm reiterating what I've been told, the city more money to do it and the developer, and it even makes homes more expensive. The property owner pays for this no matter what, because it's likely Toll Brothers would be, if whatever it costs them would be, and whatever they're charging for their homes. I asked the question whether residents in any other development in Boulder City are required to pay into an SID, and this has not ever happened before. If this was attached to an existing property, there would need to be protests and notices. So I am absolutely opposed to this. I believe this is contrary to the acceptance of the RFP that we had at that council meeting. That's it.
Thank you. And again, there was an amendment to that resolution, because the resolution as put forward had established a sales price which had not occurred, could not have occurred under the terms of the RFP, which was why that was corrected. So statements that may have been made at that meeting, I don't believe there's specific language within the RFP that talks about the developer giving the city less for the land should they do any improvements. Madam City Attorney, are you familiar with anything within the RFP that would have required that?
The RFP did contemplate the developer installing the stormwater improvements. The RFP was awarded to the developer. The terms are we then move forward on the land sale contract negotiation, and so that's where we would move forward. Should the city move forward with this resolution this evening, we would contact the developer and let them know, and we would just see if they were still willing to move forward. And then if not, we may have to reissue the RFP.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And again, I want to get back to the point to make it very clear about, what was done in the past. There certainly have been things that were done in the past where these types of things were considered. One was out on San Felipe, often called the Bee Hill development, where the city proposed to put improvements into that. Those residents, because they had already purchased the lots, had made the decision that no, they would forego curbs, sidewalks, that type of thing, because they did not want to pay the assessment. This is a different situation where the city currently owns this land. The storm channel is not something for aesthetics. It's something that's a requirement to be completed. And if we go ahead and not do something of this, the residents of Boulder City lose $1 million so that the developer can do what they're going to do for whatever profit they were going to do, regardless of whether they do the storm channel or not. And the people who lose are the residents of Boulder City. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Adams?
I guess I'll comment so much to the point that while I don't, I'm not opposed to receiving information or direction from staff on what that might look like. My understanding is that it would likely come out of CIP dollars, which would mean then that CIP funds, which would mean then we'd be postponing capital improvement projects to make this improvement. I'm always open for the information on what all this looks like, but at the point where if this is not something that even the majority of council is considering as something that they'd like to see, then I see no reason in asking staff to come forward with these types of proposals. I myself have doubts whether or not it is worth the to the creation of this SID. I understand it on paper. It makes sense. I absolutely understand why this would be desired. But the reality of it, I think it costs us, either way, it's going to cost the same amount of money, and it just depends on when that money comes into us. We're talking about 10, 15 years probably down the road before we would even see it realized, the investment into this, and to the point where it might delay or cause us to have to reissue an RFP. That's something I'm not interested in having to go through again. So I guess that would be my thoughts on this. I'm always open to information on what this could look like, but if the majority of council doesn't even feel that this is an appropriate direction to head, then I don't see the point in making staff do that work to provide us that information.
Which is the question before us this evening. And the fact is that if a special improvement district is not created, what is unquestioned is that the residents of Boulder City will never recover that money. We will simply be giving it up for some land to be developed, and we'll get some income from that, but we will never recover the cost of building that storm drain at the expense of the residents of Boulder City. Anyone else? I will make a motion then for approval of Resolution 7384. Anyone wishing to second? Motion fails. We will then move to item number 13, Resolution 7385, requesting distribution of American Rescue Plan funds received by the city, not to exceed $50,000 for emergency aid for COVID impacts to residents of the community. Again, this is an item that I had requested. We have received the first half of the funds that were specified in the American Rescue Plan bill that passed some time ago. That was $11 million. The city has previously used CARES Act money for a very similar program with emergency aid. There was confusion about what this money was available for when it was first approved and received by the city. That has since been clarified by rules from the Treasury Department that this money can in fact be used for supporting families who have suffered because of direct impacts from COVID-19. This is a resolution for funds up to $50,000. We had started at that level previously, and I believe amended the amount 3 times in the past. I think this is a proper way of doing this so that we see what the needs are and we address those as they become known. We've already heard from people who work at emergency aid that this type of funding is probably going to be needed. There is an extended time range for the use of this money now. The CARES Act money is no longer available, and I think this is an appropriate way to address some of the needs in our community. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Jorgensen?
Thank you. I just wanted to thank Debbie Finnegan for coming in, Kathy Morris, and for explaining how the money's been used. I know that we do have rising rates of infection at this time, and that probably the needs are greater at this time. Appreciate what you do for our community. Appreciate how you do it, and I agree with you, Mayor, in that this is a good way to spend our money, to be able to help our community and get it out there for those who are most hit by this situation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Bridges?
This is probably an unnecessary disclosure, but I always like to make it when we're talking about funding and emergency aid. I've been acting as the grant coordinator for emergency aid for going on 7 years. So I do not have a pecuniary interest. It wasn't even a grant that was applied for by me, unlike the CDBG, which I go through the process. So just to be honest about it, but I think it's, thanks Deb and Kathy for coming in and sharing about that. It's those, and the costs go up. The amount that it costs to pay a month's rent or utilities, those kinds of expenses have significantly gone up, and whether we put them up in a short-term shelter or rent, it's usually somewhere around $1,000 for one client for 1 month, and sometimes we're helping them for 2 or 3 or several months. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Fox?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a great way to spend that money, and I just want to say Deborah and her staff and everyone at Emergency Aid, you guys are doing an amazing job. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilmember Adams?
No need to be redundant, but yes.
Thank you. And again, you know, we are seeing, as Councilmember Jorgensen mentioned, you know, the infection rate has just absolutely taken off now. We're hoping that the severity of those who do become infected is not going to be as high, but COVID's still with us, and the work that Emergency Aid did over the past 2 years has been outstanding for our community, has really saved a lot of people who may have been on the edge, and I think this money is what it's intended for. This is what Congress intended the money to be used for. Not the only reason, but I'll make a motion then to approve Resolution 7385.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, and again, thank you, Ms. Finnegan, for providing the financials as well. Item number 14 for possible action, discussion and possible direction to the city attorney regarding retention of outside counsel or a consultant to assist in amending certain sections of the Boulder City Code. Again, this is another item that I have brought forward. Clearly, we have several things within our code that need updates. I know there was public comment earlier this evening from the prior city attorney. Whatever work was done in the past may still have validity now, but that process was always intended to require additional work to be done. Further, the legislature last year made some changes that are going to require other updates to our city code. Madam City Attorney, would you like to recap some of the things that we might be looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. In general, in my tenure here as city attorney, I have found that a lot of our codes are out of date and in need of updating. We do have a prior consultant's report that identifies some of those areas of concern. The legislature did, one of the major changes that was made was the passage of AB 114, which converts all traffic violations from criminal in nature to civil. I should say minor traffic violations. currently, this Boulder City Code doesn't have a mechanism for civil fine enforcement. So we'd want to, most of the traffic violations are statutory in nature, but we want to ensure that our traffic code is consistent with this bill. We'd also want to make sure we have an ability to collect civil fines and have a process in place by ordinance, which outside counsel could be beneficial in providing counsel on. There are also several other areas of our code in need of update. Our obscenity ordinance is unenforceable, and there are the sign code is also in need of review and revision to comport with existing First Amendment precedents. And then finally, we also need to update our abatement ordinance as well. So there are several areas I think that outside counsel or a consultant could be valuable in amending, and they would also be valuable in helping us prioritize what those sections are so that we can bring those forward in a manner that best addresses the needs of the public.
Thank you. And do you have any estimate on what we may be looking for to retain this outside counsel?
I don't have any cost estimates at this time. I think we're waiting here for council direction. If this is something council feels is valuable, that what we would do is look at outside firms, consultants or law firms to assist us with this. There are several. It's my understanding there are several companies that specialize in this type of thing, so we could bring that back on get some estimates and potential companies we could use.
And again, I think that is important to point out that what this is for council to express whether they want a process like this to be used, but not yet adopting that process, but asking staff, primarily Madam City Attorney, to come back with recommendations on something like this.
Yes, and if there are any specific areas of the city code that council members feel are in need of update, I believe that's within the scope of this agenda item to opine on, and that's something we can look at.
Any questions or comments? Councilmember Bridges?
Yeah, I'm going to growl. I approved and agreed with us doing this 2 years ago and starting the process on February 11th, 2020. There were concerns of discomfort and maybe not now, and we got to look into it more. And I want to know, we ended up, we should put it in abeyance with a time, and then there's no time, and we put it in abeyance, and it ended. Then again, on March 10th, we brought it up again to do it in 2020, and again, not only did it fail, it was removed from the agenda before we had an opportunity to even discuss it further. I will ask the question, what makes this different? First of all, my question is, does MCC, who we are currently have a static version of our codification, do they do this?
By MCC, are you referring to MuniCode?
Yes.
Yes, we previously contracted with MuniCode to review our city code and provide us with a report on items that were in need of update, both in our city charter and city code.
Okay.
It's my understanding, I did review that report, they identified areas that need improvement. They are a vendor we could use for this particular agenda item. So we could contact them, and they can be a vendor to use for this.
Okay, so we're already using them.
They host our code.
They host our code.
So they host our code of ordinances currently.
Okay.
And we have used them in the past to do a review of our city code and city charter.
Okay, but they do have attorneys, they do have the expertise to actually continue and through this process.
Yes, they are a vendor we could use.
Okay. Yeah, my question was what made this different? Didn't we have an opportunity to do with this with them as a chosen vendor for the publication of our code? There didn't seem Didn't there appear to be concern about whether we should oversee it or not allow it to be done? Again, I'm going to say this came up in a different form 2 years ago, and we've been sitting on it. It was voted down. It was removed from an agenda. I absolutely support it. I think we need to do that. I think the fact that we don't have a current process of updating it as we go along, as new bills are passed in the state, that our code should be updated, that NRS references might change. All of that should be a part of the process of what we do right now. It just was, this is something we've needed to do a long time ago, and I disagreed for it to be removed the first time and the second time. So with that, I will.
Thank you. And just from my perspective, I was a member of council at that time as well. I did not have confidence in the appointed officials at that time to move forward with a rewrite of our municipal code. I had not requested the removal. I don't recall it being held in abeyance. I do recall it being removed from the agenda. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Jorgensen, or Councilmember Bridges, did you have? Okay, Councilmember Jorgensen.
Yes, thank you for the clarification. So Muni Code that currently hosts our code, they could do it.
Yes,
And
they
then
could, yes.
I had a few questions, and I
Sure.
was wondering if I could get more direction or more explanation on some of this. So if we do hire outside counsel, how much would it cost and where would those funds be coming from? Would be a question that I would have. Because I know that in our budget process, we haven't budgeted for that. The other thing, how long would we be retaining this outside counsel? So what's the expected length? Because that would affect how much the cost would be. The other part that I'm wondering about is which parts of the code specifically would we be working on so that it's not open-ended, that we have a concentrated effort. Granted, I understand that we want to look at the parts that currently might be unconstitutional because we're not in compliance with certain regulations that have been passed since we have recodified. So I understand that those parts will need to be done, but it sounded specifically like there were some other areas that needed to be looked at. So those are just some questions or some directions that I would like to have some answers to.
Absolutely, and if this moves forward, we can go forward, and I think typically what we would do is issue an RFP to get requests for proposals on what this type of thing would cost. It would depend on the scope, and that would be brought back to council to determine the scope. This agenda item is with regard to certain sections of the city code, not necessarily a recodification. So that would be a different. The recodifications are updating the NRS references and things like that. Updating the substantive changes that are needed aren't necessarily taking place with a recodification, because there are several substantive changes that need to be made in order to bring our certain sections of our code in accordance with Nevada law, statutes, case law, etc.
So could you be specific with the areas that would need to be redone?
My opinion personally, I believe we need to update our abatement ordinance. We need to have a schedule of civil enforcement, a civil mechanism of enforcement. Currently, the majority of our code is criminal. So in most jurisdictions, there is a civil method of enforcement. So we have civil fines and things like that. There's an appeal process, a hearing process. Other jurisdictions tend to use hearing officers, things like that. So having that civil enforcement available, I think, is definitely a priority. Updating our abatement ordinance. Currently, Nevada law has certain requirements that are necessary for an abatement ordinance. Again, having a public hearing process, etc. And those aren't in our code. Our code does not comply with Nevada law at this time. So we need to update that. We need to update I think our liquor license code needs to be updated. Much of it is from the 1960s. So that's another area. So there are several areas. Yeah.
And Councilmember Jorgensen, I can speak to the funding portion. So the RFP process takes some time. Finance has already been working on we typically do one budget augmentation per year, but we could do a second augmentation depending on what the cost is to accommodate for that. If it's a lower cost, we might be able to find savings somewhere, but it just really depends on what it'll cost and what the scope is.
I think too, it's important to point out that, you know, one of the reasons that I requested this to come forward and what it was not done in the past, our city charter requires that any time outside counsel is retained, that be a vote of the council. And that's what this is about, is to provide direction as to whether the council wants to go ahead with outside counsel. And then, once that is specified, approve whether to retain that counsel or not. So this is not a direction, or I don't believe it's direction to city staff at this time to actually retain counsel. It's to get feedback from city staff as to what that might look like. Councilmember Jorgensen?
Is it something that could not be done in-house? That's just a question.
I could very well do it in-house. It would just take me a longer amount of time. And I think outside counsel or consultant would be able to do this quicker, and outside counsel has more resources, or a consultant, I should say, has more resources available to draft model ordinances, I think, than I do necessarily. Of course, I would always look at model ordinances and look at other jurisdictions, but they, being subject matter expertise in ordinance drafting, would have more access to resources than I do. So both efficiency and quality, I think.
I would just point out too that the work that Municode had done previously, and again, they weren't providing any recommendations for the rewrites. They were just identifying areas of the code that they believe there were problems with. It was about 3 inches thick. So it's a significant undertaking. And on top of that, we have the factor that the legislature has put new law out there regarding civil penalties versus the criminal that only happened last year. Councilmember Adams?
Thank you, Mayor. We can agree or disagree on whether or not action taken by previous council was appropriate or inappropriate, but all I can say is we're here right now, and I think it would be inappropriate for us to not move forward with this because it is something that has to be addressed. So,
any other questions or comments? I'll make a motion then directing Madam City Attorney and City staff to come up with a proposal, to develop a proposal, and return that to City Council regarding the possible retention of outside counsel for the purposes of amending sections of the Boulder City Code. Anyone wishing to second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. Item number 15 for possible action, matters pertaining to waiving the 6-month interim performance evaluation included in the city attorney and city manager employment agreements. Madam City Clerk, would you like to address this item?
Certainly, thank you. This item pertains to the city attorney and city manager's employment agreements. In their agreements is a section stating they are to have a 6-month interim performance evaluation. We're asking that matter be waived and just move forward with the regular annual evaluation performances that are included in their agreement, which will take place in March. The city manager's interim, for instance, would take place in February, and his annual is going to be in March. And in city clerk's contract, that particular section was removed. So again, we're not asking that any changes be made to the agreement, but just waive the requirement for the interim performance evaluation.
Mayor and council, may I make a statement?
Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to inform Mayor and Council that I do have a pecuniary interest in my contract. And so, as city attorney, I cannot advise, provide any advice or participate in discussion in this matter.
Thank you. Mr. City Manager?
And pursuant to NRS 281A.420, I'd like to disclose to the mayor, city council, and public that I also have a pecuniary interest in this item as it involves my employment agreement, so I'll be abstaining from participation on this item.
Thank you. Again, this boils down to a matter, I think, of when these contracts were put in place with Madam City Clerk. The language was not included to that because the March timeframe that had been identified would allow for adjustments to budgets by the end of the fiscal year before the beginning of the next fiscal year, which was why that March time period had been identified in the contracts. With Madam City Clerk's contract, her hiring date was that 6-month period of time was pretty much on target for the March period of time. Mr. City Manager would have made a month's difference. Madam City Attorney, there was some leave that was involved here that would have made that 6-month period of time or 6-month review probably not very practical. So I think that it's very important that these evaluations get done on an annual basis. Those annual reviews are in all of the contracts for the city manager, city attorney, and city clerk. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'll make a motion then to waive the 6-month requirements but retain the annual evaluation requirements within the contracts for the city attorney and the city manager.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Item number 16, for possible action, City Council appointment to the Clark County School District Oversight Panel. I think, Mr. City Manager, you had mentioned you had a little bit of knowledge about this organization or this panel that CCSD has. They did not meet at all last year.
That's correct.
Which is why we don't have a current appointee, as they were not holding meetings.
And they're now looking to meet again, so that's the reason why this is coming before the council tonight.
And I believe my response have been nice to have this panel in action before they decide to consolidate or suggest consolidating all the schools here in Boulder City, to at least allow us a little bit of time to have some input on that. Anyone have questions, comments regarding this item? I'll be honest with you. I'm really not sure what the goal of this panel is, but I do think that participation by a member of council, so that we don't run into situations as we had, is probably a very good idea. Councilmember Adams?
Thank you. I'd be happy to volunteer myself for this. I have a sister, brother-in-law, mother, who all work within CCSD, so I think I have at least some of that knowledge. I do know that Councilmember Jorgensen sits on another board related to education, so by all means, if you would like to be on this board, I certainly would defer to you. I also did want to make it a point that I have wedding commitments at the beginning of June, so that could be an issue, but of course it allows for telecommunication. But I did want to let everyone know that I am willing to volunteer for this if that is desired. So,
thank you. Councilmember Jorgensen?
If you want it, you can have it. But if you would like me to, I also have an interest in it, but I'm happy to let you carry it.
I would defer to you,
Oh, awesome.
Member
Thank you.
Jorgensen.
Any other questions or comments? You know, I do think it's a good idea, and again, Councilmember Jorgensen already serves on one CCSD-related body. You know, I think that's a good idea that, you know, somebody develop contacts, the information that might go hopefully hand in hand with something like this. So I'll be happy to make a motion then that the person for this appointment would be Councilmember Jorgensen.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Congratulations. Let us know how it goes. Item number 17, City Manager's Report. Mr. Tedder.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight we have the claims paid for November 2021 and the financial report for the same period of time, and I have nothing unusual to report this evening.
Thank you. Questions or comments from Council? Thank you, Mr. Tedder.
Thank you.
Brings us to item number 18, the final public comment period. Comments during the final public comment period may be on any subject. Speakers will have up to 5 minutes to speak. As always, we do ask people to be civil and concise in their comments. Is there anyone in chambers who would like to speak during the final public comment period? All right, we will take phone calls then. Anyone wishing to call in, this is our final public comment period. The phone number 702-589-9629. This is the final public comment period for City Council meeting. Anyone wishing to call in, the phone number is 702-589-9629. Madam City Clerk, were there any comments received via email prior to the meeting?
Yes, one comment.
Please go ahead.
This comment is from Courtney Causey. When will Boulder City be offering free Wi-Fi access to the whole city? We are small enough and it would provide service for visitors and locals. And there's several websites listed which will be included in the record. www.wired.com, www.vtrural.org, statetechmagazine.com, and turbofuture.com.
Thank you. Again, last call, anyone in chambers who would like to speak in public comment? All right, hearing no one, we will close the final public comment period then. Move to item number 19, our council reports. Councilmember Adams.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't think I need to inform anybody that the Omicron variant does seem to be dominant at this point. For those who are testing, we're seeing about 27% positivity rate. So I know we have heard that this is milder or not as bad. I just ask that people not take the risk. I've seen firsthand the damage that COVID-19 can do. With that, January 13th and 26th at the Boulder City Library, the Southern Nevada Health District will be hosting immunization clinics for adults and children between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. This is for vaccines needed for school attendance, for traveling, things of that nature. So we're not talking about COVID-19 vaccinations. We're talking about your other general vaccinations, including your flu vaccine and stuff like that. They'll also be hosting it again on February 17th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. With regards to SNWA, in December we held a special meeting which passed, when SNWA passed a resolution supporting a moratorium on all new turf for any development with exceptions for schools, parks, and playgrounds. There was also another resolution which supported a moratorium on the use of evaporative cooling for all new developments. These are steps that we need to take in order to protect our water resources. If these steps are not taken, we don't have enough water to support the projected growth and development that is already slated essentially to begin at this point within the valley. Obviously, Boulder City, we are a drop in the bucket, as it were. But we all need to participate. So that is the intent, is that now the different municipalities and jurisdictions which participate with the SNWA would be moving to codify those and put those into ordinances. So we have to all get together here and make sure we are protecting our water resources for the future.
Thank you. Councilmember Fox? Thank you. Councilmember Jorgensen? Thank you. Councilmember Bridges?
Yes, my regular shout out to Emergency Aid of Boulder City that if you are struggling as a result of COVID or not, suffering an emergency and need assistance with rent or utilities, food, please contact Emergency Aid. There's a website and you can call them and make an appointment. Nobody in Boulder City who is struggling with an emergency or COVID-related situation should worry about having to be affected. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start out with a couple of bright notes. You know, the economy is recovering, as Councilmember Adams indicated. We're seeing this Omicron variant just take off in terms of infections. We're going to have to see where that goes, because normally when we see something like this, within the next 2 weeks, hospitalizations go up. A couple weeks after that, we start seeing the fatalities. We've already seen the hospitalization rates go up. I know, you know, it's putting even more stress on healthcare workers, and many of them have just simply had enough. So we can help out by getting those vaccines. If you still have questions about those, again, please talk to a healthcare professional. The internet's not the best place to get information about those. Flu shots as well, you know, that's not the same. And also, if you had the vaccine 5 or 6 months ago, you're probably eligible for the booster. That's being strongly recommended by the healthcare professionals to help fight off the virus, or at least not have to suffer from severe symptoms. You know, CES just completed last week. I was at the Las Vegas Convention Visitors Authority meeting this morning. It went well. It did not go spectacularly because a lot of the companies did not come in person because of the virus. So we can help out by trying to keep the infection rate down as much as possible. One of the reports that was given this morning talked about the number of seats available on airlines that fly into Las Vegas. We are currently back to 100% of the capacity pre-pandemic. So that's really good news. Now, unfortunately, not every one of those seats is filled right now, but that's out there, and the number of passengers coming in is actually well above 90%, or excuse me, is above 90% of the people coming back to Las Vegas. Railroad Museum, there was a meeting about that, and you know, it's in the design phase. The city has already approved the frontage road for that. It's still going to be, I'm sure, at least a couple years before that comes around, but it's certainly looking like a project that is headed in the right direction. Councilmember Bridges and I were out at dedication of the town site solar project. The battery storage is in there. Saw a couple of vans around with a Tesla name on there, taking care of the battery storage on site there, in addition to the work that Erivon did for the solar itself. The city has, in the contract with that, the ability to purchase power from that company. So that looks to be a benefit, and we will start getting those regular lease payments coming into the city as well. So our big thing that we've only been talking about for a couple of years, we got to beat this virus, folks. So again, please take another look if you've not gotten the vaccines. And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you all very much.